And I will go ahead and introduce Liz Adams, who's been with us. She's given us this present. We were trying to figure out, it was 3 or 4 times before. It's a great presentation. That's why we keep asking her back. So Liz Adams, she's a research associate for the Center of Environmental Modeling for Policy Development at the UNC Institute for the Environment. Her research focuses on air quality modeling, gas phase, atmospheric chemistry. So yeah, this is her deal. She has a Master of Science in Public Health and Environmental Science from the University of North Carolina, a Master of Science in Chemistry from the University of North Carolina, and a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from the State University of New York. Welcome, Liz, and with that, I will turn it over to you and you can start.
Thank you so much, Dargan. And thanks to the Towards Zero Waste community. I'm really excited to be presenting to you all, and especially honored to be doing it on the Zero Emissions Day. So this is a day when we try to kind of understand what impact our emissions have on the Earth. And so I'll try to be reviewing some of the impacts that we have and ways that we can reduce our emissions and reduce greenhouse gases, and then hopefully protect our climate moving forward. So let's see if I can get. So the first slide, just wanted to talk about how external costs of fossil fuel generation. So we get our electricity from coal-fired power plants or from natural gas plants. There's a cost associated with that generation that really isn't paid for by anyone, except for it harms our health if we're exposed to high levels of particulate matter. And so this map of the United States shows Southern Californians especially are really exposed to really high levels of PM2.5. So PM2.5 is particulate matter, and it is aerosolized, so it floats in the air. And actually out west this year, from the wildfires, the particulate matter is particularly bad and people are having trouble breathing. So climate change will make all of this worse. If you dry out the soils, you are more prone to forest fires. And so we would like to keep climate change from getting worse. And we'll talk more about ways to do that. Let's see. This is kind of the research that I do. We work with air quality models to understand where particulate matter goes, and also like if you were to reduce emissions, how it would help to reduce exposure to people who are impacted by particulate matter. So let's see if I'm seeing the whole slide. Scientists are getting better at understanding particulate matter concentrations, so aerosol concentrations, and how, like as you ride your bike along the road, you might be exposed to higher levels of particulate matter than if you're on a particularly busy road than if you were on a road that was a little bit less used by cars. And as we transition to electric vehicles where there is no tailpipe emissions, we will be reducing exposure of particulate matter to people who are sharing the roads with vehicles. So in addition to monitoring the PM2.5 concentrations, Google is using fleets to kind of understand where the particulate matter concentration is high. And we also use geostationary satellites to look down on the Earth and see where the particulate matter, there it's called aerosols, and how those aerosols are going around the world. So we also, you and I, can purchase personal air quality monitors to kind of understand our personal exposure. And so one of the monitors that I use at the house is a purple air monitor. So it can measure fine particulate matter. And so it helps me to understand when I might be exposed to these high concentrations. So sometimes you can smell particulate matter if it's from wood burning or from a backyard barbecue, and other times you can't smell it. So it's always good to have a monitor that can help you understand what you're being exposed to. Another monitor that I'm using inside is called AirThings, and that can monitor things like CO2. So as you breathe, if you have like a lot of kids in a classroom, the CO2 levels will go up. And if teachers had access to these type of monitors in their classroom, they would understand like whether the ventilation is working properly, air conditioning is helping to reduce CO2 exposure in the classroom. And this is just another resource. It's a map that you can log into on a website to see where the PM 2.5 concentrations, particulate matter concentrations are high. So again, out west, it's showing higher levels of these aerosols from forest fires and other conditions. And this OpenIQ is kind of compiling or collecting data from all types of monitors, and they're also training people to be advocates for clean air in their communities. So it's a really great way of bringing awareness to people in terms of what they might be exposed to. So we know that climate change will make air pollution worse moving forward. So air pollution makes climate change worse, and climate change makes air pollution worse. So it's a kind of a feedback loop. So the unfortunate thing is, as the climate change causes our heat to increase, more people will be purchasing air conditioners or air conditioning their home, and that in turn will cause climate change to be exacerbated as those emissions get pumped back up into the atmosphere. And so it's just something to be aware of. And as our climate change and as our emissions increase, we'll be having more and more disasters. And so we can look at how those disasters might be impacting communities differently. So if you are kind of a low wealth community and you're in an area that has a lot of, say, hog farms where there's waste, if you have a big storm come through, you're going to be impacted in a much more significant way than if you live a little further from the coast and you don't have those kind of environmental hazards that get compounded when a storm comes through. So climate change is going to have disproportionate impact on different communities, and it's just important to be aware of that as well. Luckily, there are tools that you can use now to kind of understand your risk, and this is an example of a flood risk mapping effort. So you could look at your house. I live here on Larkspur Lane, and I don't have a particularly high risk of flooding during a severe storm, but some of my neighbors that live near the lake do. And so that's just important for everyone to be aware of. And as these tools and predicting kind of what storm impacts we might be having get better and better, it'll help people understand their risks and what they might need to do to mitigate that risk moving forward. So what is the solution to all this? So what we all need to do to reduce the climate change impacts is to reduce our emissions. And one of the ways we can do that for our homes is to invest in energy efficiency improvements, and also to change the fossil fuels that we do use. So if you have a electric stove or a gas stove, to switch that over to an electric stove, it's much more efficient, and it also reduces the emissions that get produced. So the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association tracks these types of investments. So back in 2018, when I gave this presentation, there were 16,000 jobs associated with the energy efficiency sector, basically jobs where people go into your home and put in additional insulation. They kind of seal your home so that you're not leaking a lot of air conditioning into the atmosphere. And so those jobs are local, and they are great jobs in terms of paying good wages. And I just looked recently for this presentation. Now in 2021, we can see that there's 88,000 jobs associated with the sector. So this sector is growing. And also the way that we're building buildings with LEED certified buildings is increasingly being improved so that the buildings aren't built poorly to begin with. And that's very helpful because it ends up that we will, let's see, is this blocking? We will end up paying less in our energy bills, and also we're then also not creating emissions that go into the atmosphere. So I guess my message is that these types of climate solutions really have health benefits now, in addition to reducing carbon later on. So if you have a gas stove that's not working particularly well, really look, and price out electric stove options. There's induction ranges. There's all kinds of good options other than using a gas stove. And same with your lawnmower. If it's older and you need to get a new one, please look at getting an electric lawnmower. And you can even get one that kind of does the lawn for you, which would be my personal favorite. I mean, in terms of your vehicles, if you have an older gasoline vehicle that's getting really high bills when you take it in for maintenance, like price out and look at electric vehicles as an alternative. And you'll be hopefully saving money by switching to these electric appliances and electric lawn tools. And also you'll be improving your health because you won't be exposed to the fumes that are associated with these products. So another thing you can do is kind of look at what your average annual electricity bill is and kind of compare it with what the bills are in other states. So you might get something from Duke Energy now that says you're using energy that's less than your neighbors or more than your neighbors. So one of the nice things that Duke is doing now as well is a home energy house call program. So they will come to your house and they will look at your previous electricity bills to kind of get a good sense of your usage. And then they'll check your home for leaks. They'll look at your insulation levels. So if your home is a 20-year-old home, it might need to have the insulation improved because that helps keep your air conditioning, in the house rather than letting it go out into the atmosphere. So you're basically not trying to heat something beyond your own home or heat or air condition. And then they'll also review your appliances. So if your furnace is 20 years old, it might be time to get a new one. And then the important thing that you'll want to do is kind of take the information that they give you and really examine what their suggestions are, and then go off and get quotes and make sure that you consider, switching from a gas furnace, say, to a heat pump, which the heat pump can do both the air conditioning and heating, and that will save you money in the long run in terms of your electricity bills. But it also is more efficient. So all these, ways of improving your home, whether you switch your lighting from the older incandescent light bulbs to using LEDs, using efficient shower head, sealing your home in terms of like putting stuff around your windows so that they don't leak. All those things can help reduce your utility bill and improve the comfort in your home as well. So this is a resource where in North Carolina, families can save almost $500 per year by switching their furnace and air conditioner to a heat pump. But also this plot is trying to show that the national emissions, if we just plan for a clean grid, so if all of our power was supplied by wind and solar, we still would not reach a full reduction in emissions. We also have to retrofit our homes. We have to switch from furnaces to heat pumps. And so this blue line would be ideal, as if we had really high uptake in terms of people being willing to switch from their furnaces to a heat pump. We will help reduce emissions even further and save money. So North Carolina has a plan to electrify our power sector. So hopefully reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2030 and attain carbon neutrality by 2050. Now, this was an executive action, not something that went through the legislature. So we still have to hopefully get the legislature to act as well as what the governor's commitments are. These are two maps. On the left, it shows the solar. So solar is in orange, wind is in green. So this lone wind power plant on the coast, and then hydroelectric. So in 2018, this is what the map looked like. And on the right, it shows this installed renewable energy systems. So we've seen an increase in, I would say, solar, but not necessarily an increase in wind. And we don't really see a huge amount of increase in utility solar. So there's a lot more that can be done moving forward. This plot shows on the left what our utility generation sources were in 2018. So we were primarily getting our electricity from natural gas fired power plants and coal fired power plants, and a little bit from renewables. And on the right, it shows that we really have been successful in shutting down some of the coal fired power plants. And again, coal fired power plants really have the greatest amount of emissions that for CO2 and also harmful NOx and SOx that create pollution that's harmful to us. And so it's really important that we get this all the way down to zero, have no coal-fired power in our electricity generation, and really boost up the renewables moving forward. And this is just another screenshot of pledges that have been made. So back in 2018, I think when I last gave this talk, although I may be wrong, the US was deemed to be critically insufficient in their pledges to reduce carbon dioxide. And so what that meant, critically insufficient, meant that we were headed towards a 4-degree plus warming world. Now in 2021, they're saying that we're only insufficient. So we're headed for a 3-degree warming world, which is still not great. We really need to get down to the 1.5 degree warming. So it still will be warmer than it is now. And so that means there will be still severe storms associated with climate change, but it won't be as devastating as if we were allowed to allow the atmosphere to warm up to 4 degrees. So this is just a plot that shows how, if we had really high uptake of heat pumps across the US. So this is not just in North Carolina, where the weather is currently really good at handling. Heat pumps can handle both air conditioning and the heating requirements needed for our type of weather. But up north, like say in Massachusetts, the technology, I think, is now getting to the point where heat pumps can also handle and be installed for those climates as well. But if we have high uptake across the US, then by 2050, we will have reduced or eliminated the emissions associated with residential uses. So this is including our space heating, which is basically our using the heat pumps and using heat pump water heaters, and going towards electric cooking stoves is what we'll need to do. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about my journey. So back in 2012, I think, I had just had a pretty bad winter in terms of seeing really high utility bills. And so we decided that we were going to see if it was possible to get a better air conditioning heating system. So we did invest in basically doing a home energy audit, which said what sorts of insulation improvements we needed to have done, and the leak testing basically showed where the leaks were in our home. And so they went around and sealed up the pipes that had gaping holes in them. So this, and also investing in the heat pump, reduced our electricity bills after 2012. So at the same time, we also got an electric vehicle. So this yellow line is also the electricity. So the gas is in the red, and that was decreased. Our gas usage was decreased by getting a heat pump with I think it was a backup furnace, which we don't use as much. And that's why we've been able to reduce our utility bills for heating. But for electricity, it actually goes up a little bit because we're also using an electric vehicle. And so we're charging at home the electric vehicle, which caused our electricity usage to go up. But the big message is that with the heat pump investment and also the electric vehicle, we were saving money on our utility bills, and quite significantly saving in terms of not having to pay for gasoline for our vehicle. So I became what was called a prosumer. Instead of just consuming electricity, we also put solar panels on our roof. And this has been 9 years now. We've had solar on our roof, and this allows us to kind of reduce our electricity bills, and pretty much powers the amount of electricity that gets generated on our roof pretty much powers our electric vehicle. So it was a good win-win. And then we put all this kind of information from our utility bills into what's called the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And we're able to document and show a reduction in our energy costs and also a reduction in our CO2 emissions. So the work that we did at our home caused 11% reduction in CO2. And moving forward, that continues to be reduced. So every year that we're not paying those high utility bills, we're also not pumping pollution into the atmosphere. So it's a win-win. So we're not 100% clean energy because, of course, the grid isn't clean yet. So we also purchased renewable energy credits that offset our fossil fuel usage. And we do that through Arcadia Power, which has a program where basically they take your utility bills from your electric Duke Energy bill and purchase renewable energy credits for you. And then you pay a little bit for those renewable energy credits. And then you can basically fund, using that difference in the bill, you're funding wind and solar plants, not locally necessarily, but somewhere in the US. They usually tell you where your solar and wind is coming from. So you may have heard efforts by companies. So Apple and Google all kind of have pledges to switch to 100% renewable energy by 2035 or 2050. And then sometimes municipalities try to do this. So the mayor of Pittsburgh pledged to do this by 2035 back in 2018. Sorry. So I think I had made note of this pledge back in 2018 because it was kind of unusual, but I don't really see that they're continuing the pledge now. So it may have been difficult to convince all the businesses, the hospitals, the schools within Pittsburgh to do this. So I'm not sure if they're still tracking this pledge or not, but it just lends itself to the idea that this is hard. It's hard to convince everyone in your town to switch to clean energy. And it's, there are lots of programs that municipalities can join. There's the EPA Green Power Program. There's the Sierra Club, 100% renewable energy pledge. But doing the work, getting people to make investments is difficult. But they are doing it. So this is what's called Google's Environmental Insights Explorer. And basically similar to how I put all my utility data into the energy portfolio manager, Google is tracking building emissions for the entire city of Pittsburgh. And they, in 2018, were finding that almost 5 million equivalents of CO2 emissions per year. And now in 2021, they've reduced it to 3 million CO2 equivalents. So they've done the calculations. So for every building, they've calculated how much emissions they were using back in 2018. And now, based on whether they've switched to clean energy or whether they've done energy efficiency upgrades, they've managed to reduce their CO2 emissions from the building sector pretty significantly. And I guess they're continuing to meet those targets. They're also doing it on the transportation side. So they had 1.5 million CO2 equivalents back in 2018, and now it's not quite a million. So they've reduced it quite a bit in the transportation sector. So they have potential for additional rooftop solar. They have utility solar and energy efficiency. All those are kind of local jobs that will increase the wealth and the health of the community. So it's great that they're making this type of progress. And I wish we in the Research Triangle Park area had access to this kind of data where we could see whether businesses are making progress in reducing their emissions. This is a map. I don't know if you've seen this before, but basically it shows what the cheapest electricity is in your area. So for our area in Durham, Research Triangle Park area, the cheapest generating source right now for us is solar PV, so utility solar. On the coast, in the Outer Banks region, the cheapest source will be wind when they're able to do that development. And same with the in the mountains of North Carolina. So if Duke Energy continues to build out gas-fired power plants, they're really not choosing the very lowest source of electricity. They should be investing more in utility solar, because otherwise we will be paying the difference, the ratepayers, the people that purchase that electricity from Duke Energy, we will be paying more if they choose to continue to build gas-fired power plants. This is another one of the communities or the programs that I was talking about where EPA recognizes green power communities. So if we could get Cary or Raleigh to join this program, basically we would have to commit to getting all of our power from green sources. So the town of Cary does have a goal to reduce their carbon emissions 25% by 2025 and 10% by 2040. So these are not insignificant pledges. It's just a matter of whether, how they're going to go about meeting these commitments. Because as you saw with my home energy efficiency upgrades, I really got 11% reduction in carbon emissions from changing my furnace and air conditioner to a heat pump and doing the what is it called, leak sealing and weatherization of my home. So that it's harder to do with older housing stock, right? To make these types of energy efficiency upgrades really work. And it's also harder if you start out with poor building stock. So if we're not asking the town of Cary to kind of build or require builders or developers to build with LEED or some sort of base standard that is making the buildings more efficient to begin with, it's harder as time goes by to meet these commitments. Wake County just made a super great announcement of putting solar panels on 6 of its libraries and 3 of its fire stations or EMS stations. So they had a requirement for buildings to be built to be solar ready. So these buildings were built previously, but they were already solar ready. And so then they just had to have a contract worked out with a solar developer to go ahead and install the solar after the buildings were already built. So this will be a super investment for our community as well. And you too could check to see if your roof would be an ideal place for solar. And so this website is basically a solar calculator. So they use satellite data to measure your roof area. And then they look and see whether or not you have a lot of shading. So this is my house here. And it's got quite a bit of shading. And so we have to, we had to kind of take that into consideration. And so it means that we may not be generating as much power as someone with no shading could have generated. Let's see. So in addition to solar, the other types of ways that you can reduce your emissions is kind of by doing, some of the important things in terms of how you treat your food waste. Do you compost it? Do you take it to the town's compost site? Do you use efficient toilets, so to reduce water consumption? And there's also switching, of course, to electric vehicles and switching to using solar panels on your roof or purchasing renewable energy credits. So, and the other, there's other ways besides getting an electric vehicle. You could switch your transportation mode. So if instead of driving your car everywhere, you could switch to taking the bus or to riding your bike. And I've tried to do that this year, and I've been building on previous year's efforts. And so I actually have, let's see if I can get this. I actually have ridden my bike almost as far as I've driven my electric vehicle this year. Now, I didn't drive very much because of the pandemic. I only drove my car 2,000 miles so far, and I've ridden my bike almost that far as well. And I've spent almost twice the amount of time on my bike as I've spent in my car. And another thing I will note is that electric vehicle maintenance is really, really low. You don't have to take it in to do hardly anything, maybe rotate the tires every couple of years. But there aren't surprise maintenance bills with electric vehicles because there just aren't that many parts in an electric vehicle that need to be fixed. Your brakes are using regenerative braking, and so they last for the lifetime of your car. And driving an electric vehicle to me has been a super reliable and safe, and we charge our car at home so we don't have to go to a gas station. So all those things have made driving an electric vehicle just a pleasure. So there are, if you can't invest in electric vehicles or in energy efficiency upgrades, there are other ways to offset your carbon emissions. So one of those is associated with this video. I don't think I'll play it today, but there are volunteer organizations that you could make donations to. And this is a really exciting one that I found recently called the Footprint Project. And they are trying to deploy solar panels to areas like Louisiana that recently had the hurricane. So rather than having diesel generators provide power when the power is lost in a community, they can provide power from solar. And that also introduces the community to the possibilities of using solar moving forward when they're building back their areas that were devastated by the hurricanes. So that's a great project. And this is just a slide that to try to encourage you to look into things. So, if you have investments, try divesting from any sort of fossil fuel investments. And so Harvard just recently did this. This was a significant win by the students at Harvard who had been pushing them to basically get rid of fossil fuels in their investments that were held by the endowment. And so now that Harvard has done it, probably UNC and other universities will kind of be pressed hard to also follow suit. So at home, and you could encourage your workplace to electrify everything. So electricity is super efficient. So as you switch from using a gas-powered lawnmower to an electric lawnmower, you'll see how much smoother it runs, how you're not getting exposed to fumes from the gasoline. So anything that you can switch to being all electric will increase the efficiency of whatever that is, and also improve your health. So for T and detective, it's track your utility bills. So you can try to keep track of over time, how high your utility bills are getting. And that was really an impetus back in 2012 when we were getting crazy high gas bills for us to look at doing things differently. And I was also noticing that our furnace kind of smelled like gas. So they put a tracer in gas that you can smell. It's kind of like rotten eggs. And when I was, when it wasn't working well, I was going out to look at it, see what was up with it, and really could smell the gas leaking from the furnace. That's also not a good sign. And so it was really why we went down this road of doing these home improvements to get a better heating and air conditioning system by switching to the heat pump and improving our local air quality, as well as reducing our bills and the carbon emissions. So, explore your exposure. So this is it. If you're willing to purchase one of the purple air monitors, or even just want to go and look on the purple air map, you can see, when the PM2.5 levels are high. So even in North Carolina, we sometimes get some of the particulate matter from the forest fires out west or from Canada. And so we'll have high levels of PM2.5. They'll spike due to certain weather patterns. And so it's just important to kind of understand your exposure, and then you'll be kind of inspired to reduce. So maybe you'll be for me, I'm really cognizant of whether the barbecue has been cleaned, and so I'm not generating emissions from that. And we don't burn wood anymore because we don't want exposure to PM2.5. So there's lots of ways to kind of become aware of your exposure to these particulate matter emissions and then reduce your exposure. And then, so the next one is C, for charging ahead with electric vehicles. So I think next week is an opportunity to go and test drive or meet people that own electric vehicles in your community. So you can look for those events, electric drive events, and you basically can talk to someone who owns an electric vehicle and kind of get to know their the types of vehicles they have. So there's so many now. I have a Nissan Leaf, but there's Polestar, there's the Teslas, there's all kinds of vehicles. That there's even the Ford 150 Lightning now. So it's an all electric truck that's available. So no matter what type of vehicle you're driving, you probably could find something that would work for your family. And we've leased the electric vehicles so that basically when I started leasing in 2012, every time we are up for a new vehicle after the lease term, we're getting a car with longer range and more, basically the ability to drive further due to that longer range. And that's because the batteries technologies have improved so much over the years. So, so for T, try ditching fossil fuel usage at home. So one of my goals is to replace my stove, which is a gas stove, with an electric induction stove. And so I haven't quite gotten there yet, but that's on our to-do list. And so I encourage all of you to think about ways that you could, perhaps it's an old gas hot water heater that you have that's kind of been acting up and needs to be replaced anyway. Well, when you get quotes for a replacement hot water heater, ask them, is there a heat pump water heater that could, be better for your home? And the answer usually is, if they're not familiar with how to install electric heat pump water heaters, they'll say stick with the old thing. But you need to kind of really push contractors to offer you alternatives, because it's healthier for the climate and healthier for yourselves at home. Having a carbon monoxide source in your home, something that's burning, is always a risk. And so if we can eliminate fossil fuels from our homes, it makes our homes safer for ourselves. So investigate, vote, and then, do efficiency upgrades and support science is the last thing. So just another reminder that CO2 emissions are cumulative. So as these gases enter the atmosphere, they form like a warm blanket. Is an invisible blanket of gases that are causing our Earth to warm, and they're long-lived. So every CO2 molecule that goes up, it lives there for a very long time. And so as they are up there, they will not go away quickly. And that's why we have this problem. It's kind of like a compounding interest that you would have either with your debt or with your investments. It's the same thing with CO2 emissions. You have a compounding increase in CO2 in the atmosphere due to everyone's use of fossil fuels. And the sooner that we can get rid of our dependence on fossil fuels, the less heat we will be adding to the atmosphere. Let's see. So this is another slide reiterating the same point. And I'm sorry to be repetitive, but so the best time to make these kind of investments is when you need them. So if your air conditioning system seems to be failing, if it's if your bills are going up because the system is getting less efficient over time, now is the time to look at a heat pump. And so to get quotes from contractors in your area and learn more about it. So there is an Electrify Everything Facebook group with free tutorials for homeowners on how you can work with contractors to get the best quotes for heat pumps. And same with solar. So if you're interested in solar and you also need a new roof, that's the best time to make that investment. So you have to find a contractor who's willing to give you quotes for both the roof and the solar panels, and see if you can show basically a payback period that's reasonable. By putting the new roof, you've got a safer home, and adding solar, you're going to be reducing your electricity bills over time. It'll pay for itself. But the question is, how long does it take for that investment to be paid for? There are great groups in North Carolina. One of them is Clean Air North Carolina that you can join. And also for electric vehicles, Plug in America is another great organization for you to know about and join. And so the last point I think I want to make is that all of these investments are kind of local jobs that will improve our economy. And so I think this is part of President Biden's Build Back Better plan to invest, to put money into these technologies to make electric cars better, to make heat pumps better. All of this will help to reduce our utility bills and our transportation costs. And as we reduce those costs, then we'll have money to invest in other things. So one of the big things I think that's still not worked out in President Biden's Build Back Better legislation is whether people that are low income could get solar tax credit that would help them put solar on their homes. Or another way to go for that is to have community solar. So allow people to purchase solar in a community solar farm. And so all those are still things that need to get worked out at the policy level. And coming up on September 24th, I guess that's this Friday, is it? Will be a global climate strike. So basically it's a way of showing the interest in protecting our climate, and Towards Zero Waste is one of the sponsors of this event. So we really encourage everyone to come out and basically show in numbers the amount of people that are concerned about our climate and want policymakers to act on this type of legislation. Let's see if I have anything else. I think that's it.
Okay, yeah, I was going to mention the climate strike at the end there. I'm glad you got it. So I will unmute everybody, but while I do that, we have a question in the chat. And it's from Holtec M, and it is, what happens when the electricity is generated from coal? Greenhouse gas avoidance should be considered, should consider the feedstock for megawatt hour.
Oh, I'm not sure I quite got that.
Right. What happens when the electricity is generated from coal? GHG avoidance should consider the feedstock for MWH.
Yeah. So right. So what we want to do is switch from using coal-fired power plants to using wind and solar. So that is the feedstock. So instead of using fossil fuels as a way to generate our electricity, we need to use renewables. And as we do that, our grid gets cleaner and less emissions go into the atmosphere. And so less warming will occur and less storms and less fires. So yeah, we absolutely want to stop using any coal firepower for our utilities. But we, as a consumer, we can only purchase electricity from Duke Power. Unless you purchase these renewable energy credits from Arcadia or some other provider, you're basically purchasing whatever the electricity mix is that they're providing. And so there's ways that you can go to the utility commission and say, we want Duke Energy to transition quicker away from burning coal as part of providing us electricity. But really, we're kind of captured. We don't have a mechanism to say, Duke, you have to stop using coal. There isn't a direct way of us putting pressure on them. You can become a stockholder and then put pressure on them that way. And you can go into these climate strikes and other kind of public action, but you can't say, I don't want to pay for any coal-fired power plant in my bill. So that's unfortunate. It would be nice if we had options and we could, purchase community solar or purchase wind power directly from renewable energy providers. That would be much better. But because our utilities are regulated monopoly, we don't really have a lot of choice.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? I think I allowed you to unmute yourself if you do. Anybody? If not, I do. I do also want to say you're absolutely right about the electric vehicle. We actually bought a used Leaf, so we cut the cost there. And I am shocked that it's so convenient and easy. I don't have to stop for gas. I don't have to get oil changes. They're like 22 moving parts on it. It has been just so nice and convenient. I'm always shocked that it just hasn't taken off yet. And also we have the electric lawnmower and also leaf blower, which is pretty good. Okay. So to follow up to the question that I asked earlier, it says advocating for electric appliances as an impact tool is not always the answer when consumers don't have transparency over sources. Focusing on education around reduction is perhaps a better medium than to transit to electric.
Yeah, but I would add a caveat in that most of the gasoline, that when you drive a vehicle that's powered by gasoline, for instance, that is a much less efficient vehicle than driving a car that is electric. So there's just an efficiency loss when you are using a fossil fuel. Like most of the energy is actually put out by heat. So the combustion engine is burning the fossil fuel and it's radiating heat. So that isn't converted into energy that's propelling the vehicle forward. So really, I think the grid is going to get cleaner with time. And as we purchase equipment, whether it's vehicles or transitioning our homes to all electric, that efficiency, right? So a hot water heater that's powered by gas is going to be less efficient than a hot water heater powered by a heat pump. So that the efficiency alone takes care of some of the problem, but the grid will also pushing, Duke Energy to go all electric, but it also just shows kind of momentum in awareness by consumers that this is one way that they can become more, reduce emissions by purchasing things that they use. So every day, so my electric lawnmower certainly is more efficient than a gasoline lawnmower, and same with my heat pump, water heater, and the heat pump air conditioning replacement. Basically, all these devices that people can use in their home are more efficient and therefore less wasteful of energy.
Okay, and we actually have somebody from Miami-Dade on the call, all the way in Florida, and I'm in Miami-Dade, and we have nuclear plants. What is the footprint for nuclear?
So, nuclear always has the nuclear waste problem. I'm not sure what you mean by footprint. I know, like in North Carolina, if I go to that earlier slide, it's providing for us like almost 30 or 40% of our electricity generation in North Carolina. The problem with nuclear is the cost of developing new nuclear. So I think it was Georgia that has a failed nuclear power plant that ratepayers are going to be paying for, and it may not ever get developed in terms of being something that provides them with power, but they have to pay the costs of that mistake, basically, of trying to develop new nuclear. So there's just high risk, and there, of course, are also issues with health. If there's tsunamis that cause nuclear power plant accidents, those are things we do not want to think about. But to me, the clear answer is if we want to pay less for the power that we use, that we need to transition away from nuclear and the fossil fuels and transition over to renewables such as wind and solar and hydroelectric in some cases. So.
And I know there were some people commenting, I think I actually did it right now where you all can unmute yourself. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, please do. We just have a few more minutes to ask questions. Let's see. Oh, and to the last question, greenhouse effect footprint is what the person meant. Turkey Point is on the ocean front. It is scary in so many ways. Yes.
So nuclear power doesn't generate CO2 emissions, but it has a huge water requirement. So that's why these power plants are on the coast, is because they need access to water for their cooling towers. So if you think about that places them at risk because they're near water when flooding from intense storms might cause kind of uncontrolled events to happen right in the nuclear power plant facility, right? If you have flooding that you're not ready for, that cause problems, but also if you're in any sort of drought exposed area, so that water that you could be using for land uses, basically to grow crops and provide food, if that's being diverted towards cooling towers. So, but all the fossil fuels, coal and natural gas, have a huge water requirement because they have to generate, turn generators using steam. So they're basically heating up water, turning the generators and creating electricity. Those requirements are not there for wind and solar. So you basically kind of take away the need for such high water intense plants. And so that will hopefully also be a savings for all of us moving forward.
And do you know much about, I've recently just discovered there's a mini reactor concept out there. Do you know about that and what your thoughts are?
I don't know anything about the mini reactors. So I'm really not a pro-nuclear fan, and so I don't really do a lot of research into it. I don't understand the technology. I tend to just shy away from it myself. And so I know there's probably people that are interested in that, and they could probably answer those questions much better. But me personally, I just not an area of expertise that I have.
Just curious. We've got just a few minutes, well, we're actually closing in on the end here. Real quick, it says, what 6 cities have reached their goals?
That's a great question. So I took that quote from somewhere else, and I didn't actually do the research to find out. So I don't know, but I'll try to look that up and get back to you guys. So it would be great to know what those are in terms of going clean energy. Some of the cities that already had a really high access to hydroelectric power, so out west where they have kind of dams that can create electricity from hydro, they may have been able to meet their commitments a little earlier. But of course, now with drought, that puts some of those systems at risk. So it's always going to be, I think, a moving target that you can set a commitment and say that you're 100% renewable energy. But if a storm comes through and causes a problem, or if there's a drought, or if there's a forest fire, you're kind of back to ground zero and you have to start again. So what we want to do is reduce emissions, kind of everybody doing as much as they can, paying attention to this issue, tracking their utilities. I mean, that's one way to calculate CO2 equivalent emissions. If everyone is kind of cognizant of their energy use and how to become more efficient, either by driving less or by using less electricity in their home, or by switching to more efficient devices. I don't even know what I should be calling these, these investments, but the more we can do kind of individually, and also putting pressure on policymakers to make our grid greener, the more stable our climate will be. So you'll probably hear some great announcements moving forward with the COP26 coming up next at the end of the month. I think it's October 31st that it starts in Scotland. So I think China just made an announcement that they will not provide any investment money for coal-fired power plants in other countries. So that's a great announcement that just came out, and hopefully they'll make something similar type announcement for coal-fired power plants in their own country, right? So getting the people to start thinking about the ways, what their communities are using. So whether our community has any control over switching out the streetlights from older streetlights to using LEDs, all those efficiency improvements. If they can invest in solar farms, if they can invest in wind farms, with the opportunities for offshore wind out at the Outer Banks, if we can get the transmission that we need, all those kind of efforts will end up stabilizing our climate. And so I don't think there's anything that can be done wrong. It's just that we just have to kind of work as quickly as we can and share our success stories. Like if you love driving your electric vehicle, tell everybody, invite them on rides, give them a ride to the airport. Whatever way of convincing other people to kind of join in on the bandwagon so that we can kind of celebrate our successes at the end in terms of stabilizing our climate and not suffering from storms. Like recovering from a flooding event is no fun. Recovering from any kind of disaster is terrible. So we want to make sure people in our community are healthy and happy and being productive. And the way to do that is to stabilize our climate and to provide, good housing, good transportation options, whether it's bus, train, bike lanes, all those things will help make our community better. And by modeling that success, hopefully we can show other communities how to do it too. But we are a really, I think, a wealthy area in terms of the resources that we have. So we really kind of need to work together to make as much of a difference as we can.
Great. Well, we are over time. Thank you. Any other final thought? Was kind of a final thought already, but any other announcements or anything you want to say before we head out?
No, thank you, Dargan. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's been great to, I hope I didn't rush through things. I will share my slides. They're on a Google link. So if anyone wants to look up any of the resources, we'll figure out how to get that to you. But
Yep, I will send that out. I'll send the link to the slides, and I'll send out this video for those.
okay.
I know we had some people that were emailing that were wondering if we were going to record, so we'll definitely do that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, as always, Liz. Until next time, and all right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.